Hey, you got a minute? Or should I say, have you got a few minutes? Because I'm going to tell you a story that, unlike any other story in the Bible. And this happened during the time of the Israelites when they were enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt for 435 years. I don't know about you, but I'd begs the question, how'd that happen? Well, there's a lot of details before. Let me just give you a quick summation. They had been their own nation, but they had a famine about 430 years ago and 35 years ago, whatever. And Joseph was the assistant to the Pharaoh then in Egypt. And so Joseph, who had gone through a long period of getting to that point because he himself was a Jewish boy, became Pharaoh's main guy. So he invited the Jews to come, his family, and then others. So they began to come because the famine was so bad. And more they began to propagate and grow, have children. In fact, they had children faster than the Pharaoh's people did, the Egyptians. So Pharaoh, after Joseph and this Pharaoh died, the next Pharaoh on down said, well, or whatever, said, hey, we're going to be enslaved to these people. They might make treaties with our enemies, and so we're going to have to enslave them. Besides, I want glory for myself. And the Pharaoh that we're talking about today called himself Re. And that meant he was a god. He was worshipped. So everybody believed in him. Anyway, we get to the point we're at now. They've been there for 435 years, that being the Israelites. And God called Moses first to come. And Moses had all kinds of excuses why he couldn't go back and save his people. And by the way, Moses had been 60, 70 years earlier, been in that kingdom and was grown up in that kingdom. And there's a lot of details. You go back and you look, okay, in Exodus, and you'll find some of those details. But to make the story go faster, he then left Egypt as a young man because he killed somebody. He saw an Egyptian beating somebody. In fact, the story goes on more than that, but he had to flee for his life. So 80 years now, he's 80 years old, land way out, Midian, and God calls him and God says, Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt. And Moses goes, yeah, right. In a pig's eye, I'm going back. And God says, wait a minute. My people have been crying for 400 and some years to come and rescue them. You're going to rescue them. Well, Moses had all kinds of excuses. You know how it is. People get excuses and they say, well, I can't do that for this reason. I can't. Moses wasn't a very good talker anyway. He didn't have the eloquence, and he maybe stuttered a little. So God said, okay, let's bring Aaron. So they go back to Pharaoh, and they begin to see what's going on. They see that the Israelites are slaves, and they're being being beaten. Don't put that one down. Beaten, and they were being hurt, and saw Moses, and they said, you got to rescue us. So Moses and Aaron go then to the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh says, in a pig's eye, I'm not going to let them go. What do you think I am? Who's going to send you? I don't know your God. And he said, the God of I am. Pharaoh still didn't want to. He said, I don't recognize your God. I don't care. Get out of my palace. So he leaves. God said, don't worry, Moses. And the people began to complain. In fact, it got worse as time went on, that those that were taking care of the Israelites would whip them, and the taskmasters would make it harder in their life. And they even took straw away from their bricks that they were making to bind it. And so their life became harder, and they began to blame Moses as time goes on. This is what you're doing to us. So Moses pleads with God, God, you're going to help me. So God says, I'm going to send you a very different, difficult message to Pharaoh, and he's going to let them go. They're going to come in the form of disasters, plagues. So, the first plague God sends, after Pharaoh said, no, I'm not going to let him go, and he's very stubborn, Moses took his rod and he puts it in the Nile River, and guess what happens? The Nile River turns to blood. Now, I don't know about you, but if I see something turning to blood and I see fish beginning to die and stinks and everything, I'd be upset too. I mean, the water was their irrigation. It was pretty deserty around there. A lot of sand and stuff. And so they needed water to irrigate their crops. They needed it for drinking. They needed it for all kinds of things. So guess what? Finally, and it might have been around a month's time. We don't know for sure. But let's just say within about 30 days, finally, Pharaoh says, enough is enough. People are starving. It might be starving too. They didn't have enough to drink and whatever. And so crops are dying up and so on. So he says, okay, I'll let your people go. But does Pharaoh let them go? Nope. Not. So God says, okay, I'm going to send him another one, Moses. And I'm sure Moses and Aaron are thinking, yeah, this will get him. And guess what? Plague number 2, frogs. Now, I don't know about you, but frogs are cool. I mean, they're okay and they're fun to hear them. I hear them at night sometimes, and they're just fun to hear. And sometimes they're in a little stream. I used to have a little stream when I was a kid, way in the back of a cemetery, close to where I live, believe it or not. And there was a little stream back there, and I'd go play with the frogs, or I'd do whatever. And frogs are great, but when you've got a swarm of them, maybe hundreds of thousands to millions across the whole land of Egypt, excluding the Israelite people where they lived, where they were. God kept that from them. So, all of a sudden, Pharaoh says after 2-4 weeks, all right, enough is enough. I'll let your people go. Please get rid of these frogs. And so Moses says to God, God says, I'll take care of them. Now, I don't know, there might have been some dead ones. There might have been some, frogs that were everywhere. Maybe they had to sweep them out, but they finally left. God got rid of them. They left. Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and say, okay, you need to keep your promise and let my people go so we can worship him. And Pharaoh said, no. Probably Pharaoh didn't trust him too. Yeah, we'll let you go, and then you'll run for your lives and not come back. Either way, Pharaoh was stubborn. He said, no, you are not leaving. These people are not leaving. Maybe even told Moses and Pharaoh, your lives are in danger. Moses and Aaron, your lives are in danger. So Pharaoh said, nope. So God says to Moses, I'm going to send another plague. I'm glad you put up with my mistakes, because I make mistakes sometimes, okay? But it's part of the blooper fun, right? Okay, so the next one is flying gnats. You ever had gnats get in your eyes? I hate gnats. I mean, I shouldn't hate too much, right? But I hate gnats. They will swarm me, and they get in my eyes. Yeah, just like those wiggling fingers. They get in my eyes, and they're everywhere, and their ears and mouth and nose. And after a while, Pharaoh said, that's it. Our people can't handle it. They're complaining, and I can't handle it. Get them out of here. And so God sends them away. Do you think Pharaoh changed his mind? Let the people go? What do you think? No. So guess what? God sent another plague, flies. Flies are the kind of things that are dirty. They get on things that have bacteria, could be rotting meat or dung, anything, poop, whatever. And guess what? Then they get on your food and puke and vomit and all that kind of stuff. Right? Nobody likes flies. Sometimes they bite. So finally, he'd had enough of that. The people had had enough of that. And so God says, okay, I'll get rid of all the flies. So he does. Pharaoh still wouldn't let him go. So God does the next thing. He brings another plague. And by this time, Moses and Aaron are probably going, this is crazy. You think he's going to let him go, Aaron, this time? I don't know. God's got this, Moses said. We got to trust God. So brings another plague, livestock disease. Now you understand, they had goats, probably chickens. They probably had cows and lambs and everything. And they began to get sick. Now, if those are the things you're eating and where you're getting your milk from and your eggs and whatever, when you think about it, that's not a good thing. So after a while, people get to complain, and so does Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, okay, all right, stop already, okay? We're getting hungry here. A lot of our livestock is starting to die. You've got to stop this. I will let your people go this time, and I promise. Did he promise keeping person? A promise-keeping person? No. He didn't let him go. So God said, okay, you ever do that to somebody before? They say something and you're going, yeah, I know how that goes. I know how that goes. Yeah, sure. So God says, okay, sending something else. Next one is boils. Have you ever had a boil before? Sometimes they're that big. You see that? That big! Maybe even bigger. And they're painful. You got pus coming out of them. They itch. They drive you nuts. So, didn't have any medicine to get rid of it, probably. Knowing them, they had something, but nothing worked. These things were terrible. So finally, Pharaoh says, stop. Stop. I'll let him go. Stop. Did he let him go? No. Of course he didn't. So God had to send something else. The next one is hail. Now you got to understand, they had all kinds of crops. They were prosperous. They had all kinds of good things to eat. The hail wasn't just these itsy bitsy little minute things. They were probably big, and they destroyed a lot of their crops. So Pharaoh had no choice but to say, stop. And probably in his mind, he's saying, after this stops, maybe I'll let him go this time. This is enough. Maybe in his mind, he was thinking, if I can just get him to stop, maybe it'll be okay. Either way, God stopped it. He told Moses to tell God to stop. Guess what happened? It stopped. So guess what happened? He didn't let the people go. So the next one he brings is locusts. Locusts eat everything. You ever seen grasshoppers? They were everywhere. They were on all the food that was left, and they were eating it, and they were destroying everything. So Pharaoh says, stop. I'll let your people go, please. And he's pleading with them. Didn't let him go. So the next one, which is next to the last one, is darkness. If you've ever lived in Alaska, they have darkness, times of darkness. But we have electric lamps, electricity, that we can see things. They didn't have electricity. Oh, they had light, they had torches and whatever, but it was dark. They couldn't do too much. So after a while, Pharaoh says, enough is enough. 3 days is enough. I'll let your people go. They didn't let him go. In fact, this time he was more stubborn than he was all the other times. God says to Moses, now we got him. And Moses, Aaron, now it doesn't say that in the Bible, but this is kind of what I'm surmising. Now we got him. Because he's worn down a little bit, but he's still super stubborn. I've let him be that stubborn. But I guarantee you, Moses and Aaron, this time, he's going to let the people go. So what you need to do is to tell the people two things. Number one, you need to tell them that they need to take the blood of a lamb or a goat, kill it, take the blood, put it over the door lintels, the door posts. And if you do that, then when the death angel comes, that'll pass right over you and won't kill your firstborn child. Wow. I don't know about you, but I'd do anything to protect my firstborn child. My secondborn, thirdborn, or fourborn, yeah, that's why I got 4. And 10 grandchildren, by the way. So they did that. The second thing God told Moses to tell the people is this. You need to make a meal. We now call it the Passover meal of the Jews. What that meal was is because God was going to pass over at midnight. He'll pass over the Israelites and he'll kill the firstborn of all the Egyptians, all their families, including Pharaoh's family. And it will be at midnight. And when midnight happens, Pharaoh's going to finally realize it, and he's going to tell you to leave right now. Not in morning, now. Get out. So you're going to have to make some food. So why don't you take the food of the animal you just killed, tell the families to roast it, vegetables, herbs, whatever, for your journey going out of Egypt. So sure enough, midnight came, everybody's doorpost had blood on it of the Israelites, came across to the Egyptians. The Egyptians didn't know about this. God hadn't told them. Moses hadn't told them. And including Pharaoh's baby, all the babies died. And can you imagine if you're within hearing distance of the Egyptians? The Israelites heard the screams. They heard the agony. They heard the terrible suffering of mothers and babies whose babies had died. And Pharaoh's firstborn son, as God had promised, also died. Now, this is how the story ends. Well, the first part. Pharaoh summons Moses. He's furious. And he says, I want you to take your people and go now. So Moses summons the people. He whisked out of there fast as he could, and Aaron, and they go get the people, say, now's the time to go. You should be prepared. But first, I want you to go talk to some of the neighbors as quickly as you can and see if you can get some gold and silver or anything you can to help us on this trip. And the Egyptians actually gave it to him. Why? Because they wanted him out of there, probably. All right, I'll give you anything. Take anything in my home. Just go. They were so sick of those 10 plagues, and they were weeping and crying as the Israelites are going in to get those things. And God said, that's what I want you to do. And so they went out of Pharaoh and out of Egypt. And God set something up because it was dark. He set up a pillar of fire. Now, this is probably a big pillar of fire because you're talking about 1.5 million, 2 million people. However they were, it was a lot of them. A lot. Babies, children, might have been 3. Some think 3 million. So they go out of Egypt. Moses and Aaron were leading them, but they're being led by this pillar of fire. And the reason is because God wanted to make sure they went in the right direction. If they went in the wrong direction, there could be some enemies along the line that could get them and kill them, hurt them, whatever. So God led them the right way. God's a miracle working God, isn't he? So he takes them, but all of a sudden, they begin to realize that they hear noise. They hear what sounds like rushing water. And they didn't understand what it was. But you know what? All of a sudden they realized they were at the shores of the Red Sea. And by this time, Pharaoh had already decided he was coming after him, so he was really on their heels, quickly coming. He had decided, forget it, I'm bringing these people back. What have I done? Uses his elite soldiers in chariots, the very best he had, and as many as he had. He brought them, and they chased him. By this time, as they're at the water, God begins to change something. He takes that big, huge pillar of fire, and he moves us to the very back. He's not leading them. It's not leading them anymore. It's at the back to hold off the Egyptians until God can save his people. But here's the question. How does God save his people from a sea? That's next time. And you're going to enjoy it next time, because the next one is to me, one of the biggest, if not the most miraculous thing that's ever recorded in the Bible. And there are tons of them. And they're all awesome. But this one takes the cake. I'll see you next time. When you got a minute.